Hello and welcome to the start of a week of sort of a mini series on the channel, I guess. This is going to be a specific look at training and a little guide of hints and tips to all the little things I do that can make a big difference off the pitch when you're at a football club in FM22. It's something I've been asked about probably more than most things in the comments of my two long-term stories, so I wanted to cover them in a bit more detail, and today we're going to do just that. So hopefully you're looking forward to it. Today's video, as you'll know from the title, is going to cover team training and the involvement I have with that. And then later in the week, we're going to have a look at individual training and we're going to have a look at mentoring and stuff like that too. So a few videos to come. Keep your eyes peeled for them. If you want to stay up to date with it, please do subscribe down below and turn that notification bell on. Don't worry that when you're seeing this, there will still be the daily FM22 stories as normal. Please do chuck a thumbs up if you're looking forward to it. Thank you so much to everyone for coming along and giving it a try. Now let's talk about the first area, which is team training. That is today's video. They're only going to be short ones explaining the things I do. And this isn't to say this is how you should do training in FM. This is me saying these are the things I do, which have had relative success this year. Now, as always for these guides, as we did with the Data Hub special a few months ago, I'm using my Twitch live stream save and a save from about 3, 4, 5 months previous. So hopefully there won't be any spoilers in here for people who aren't up to date with either or. And I certainly didn't want to spoil the two long-term stories. Now, for those of you that are up to date with the One Club story with Hemel, we have covered it a little bit here, but I want to talk about it in a tiny bit more detail. But first things first, if we go into the training screen, there's a couple of things before you even look at the training schedule, the training calendar, and what you want your boys to do that you've got to think about. Because ultimately, setting this up, people think it's the be-all and end-all. I've got the perfect training calendar. If you haven't done a few other things first, it's not really going to matter what your training schedule is. It can be perfect and not work if you haven't done other things. Now, in a minute, we'll talk about how you know what to choose here, how you know what your weaknesses are, how you know what your strengths are, and that links back to a previous guide too. But first and foremost, I've got to go on one of my talks about staffing, because it's something that those of you who follow the long-term stories will know I go on about all of the time. Because if you don't have good staff, and if you don't have good facilities, putting the perfect training schedule in place is useless. Of course, at non-league level, you're not going to be able to have more than 2 or 3 coaches, and you're not going to be able to have the brilliant training facilities that Premier League clubs have got. What you do want to have, though, is better facilities for your level, if you can. Use that investment on facilities and on coaches, not necessarily spending all your budget on players, because that's the thing that can actually end up holding you back or mean that you're constantly having to go shopping in the window rather than having a settled squad with a bit of momentum. Now, in the lower leagues, we do rely on momentum a bit more, but we can make little impacts on coaching because there are crucial areas where teams get gains there. Whereas in the Premier League, there are a lot more styles of play, there are a lot more different ways to have success, and there are different types of goals. So a crucial part of what you want in coaching is staffing. And once you get anywhere into the sort of EFL upwards, or even as a professional club in non-league, you can start to look at your coaching team. And what you want to try and do is adapt to your squad. Firstly, obviously make sure they've got good coaching attributes in key areas. That's something you want to build on. Or you might want to have some younger coaches in who can perhaps improve if you get them coaching badges, depending on the financial situation of your club. We're now up to a huge amount of coaches having got promoted to the Premier League. But the crucial thing I look for is the attributes both mentally and technically, because it's all great having a coach who is, say, the best goalkeeping coach in the world. They can have 20s for all 3 of the goalkeeping areas. If they then haven't got any mental attributes, they're not going to be able to help you a great deal. Let's take David Priest here as an example. He's got 15 for 2 of his goalkeeping attributes and 18 for the other, which is excellent. But the most important thing is that his mental attributes are very good, and even more importantly, his personality. Because you get so many coaches and staff in non-league that have just got balanced, the generic personality. If you can add 2 or 3 who are professional or who are determined, who can get that motivation into the lads, who can set a culture in your club, it can make a big difference. So that's what I've looked for in this Derby save, because when we're doing Twitch streams, we're not touching the coaching bits as much. We're not touching the training schedules. So we want to have people who we can trust to look after it themselves. And that's maybe the big difference between team coaching and individual. I'm the type of person, if I was a manager at a non-league football club, or even a professional one, I probably wouldn't be a hands-on coach every day on the training ground. I'd want to watch my coaches deliver my game plan, and then maybe take away odd players for little individual sessions, which is why I'm always more involved in individual than team training in FM. But what that needs is a staffing team who you can trust to be professional, who you can trust to make the right decisions, who have got that people management, who have got that discipline, who have got those motivational techniques, and that's just as important as the coaching bit. Now, one of the things that you probably do know, but I'm going to mention it anyway, if you go to your coaches screen in the training section and to edit your coach assignments, you can actually see by hovering over each of these elements which attributes are the most important. And you can see for most of the coaching ones, determination, level of discipline and motivating are just as important as any of the coaching attributes. And the other side we've got to think about there is that when we look at the coaching, you might think, oh, well, defending coach is just going to be defensive, but actually he needs to be good technically or tactically. And that's something that when I was young, I never thought about. I just went, oh, he's a good defensive coach, that'll do. But now you've got to factor in multiple attributes at the same time. Particularly when it comes to the sort of possession ones, you wouldn't think that the tactical and mental attributes need to be good there, but creating that culture of keeping the ball, it is a mentality thing part of the time. The same for the technical side too. When it comes to fitness and goalkeeping, they're a little bit easier. But even then, you've got to bear in mind that one, you only need to be good at shot stopping. The other one, handling and distribution has to be strong. But those mental attributes, the three that are highlighted in particular, are so important to the success of your team training schedule. So generally for me, I have a sort of little upgrade every 3 or 4 seasons where I go and look, see are there any outliers who haven't developed or have become slightly worse, and then just try and make sure we've got the best coaching team in the division or somewhere near that front. Obviously, we've just come up to the Premier League with Derby, so it wasn't quite as good as it was previously. But if you compare us to other clubs in the Premier League, we're above average, which for a team that's just come up last season is a pretty incredible effort. And some of them, we're very near the best. A lot of them, in fact. So definitely positive signs, and definitely a sign that we've got the right people behind the scenes to eke the best out of a squad that maybe isn't quite as good. And particularly for me, I often play with sides with smaller budgets. Derby were in administration at the start. The Hemel One club save, a semi-pro club in the National League South, and starting with no coaching badges or experience in the head coach. You're going to be at clubs where you have to maximise limited playing talent. And that's what we've managed to do here by having a good coaching team. And it is one of the strongest principles I believe in. I would rather get a great coach than a great player, because I believe that can have a better impact on 3, 4 or 5 players later down the line. Of course, many of you who are regulars will know that I'm happy to sell players for realistic fees if we get the offers as we go through leagues, as we get promoted, or for anyone other than the best homegrown youngsters really. And that means that I can then invest in facilities. We've had a bit of a setback in this Derby Twitch stream because we got our training facilities sold as part of our takeover to save the club financially. So we're actually still building through with non-league standard facilities, and it has stunted the growth of some of our players. So if you can get the facilities upgraded, rather than getting peak players, because then you can sign 18, 19-year-olds, you can develop them, they'll get experience from playing in the league, they'll develop because of good facilities, and then you can sell virtually every player on for a profit. So those two things are important before you even get to the team training schedule. So generally, if I've got that good coaching team in place, I'll leave them to set the team calendar. I won't get involved in team training. I'll delegate it. However, there are some specific times where I do get involved. 2 or 3 different situations. 1, if we're showing weakness in a certain area. 2, if we've got fixture congestion and we need to save legs, because the FM coaching staff aren't very good at doing that. And I think that's why generally human managed teams do better when there's 2 or 3 games a week. And thirdly, if we're doing well in a particular area and it's something we want to capitalise on. I'm talking more there in the lower leagues if you've got one standout area. So take an example, I had an electric quick striker in League 2 with Hemel Hempstead Town and a pretty average team around it. So I wanted to work on that direct counter-attacking through the middle, making sure the balls to him were as good as possible and that pattern of play was as well rehearsed as possible. Something that I wouldn't normally do and haven't ever done before in FM. But it worked this year because of the players we had. And you have to adapt here to your players rather than necessarily on the tactics screen, which is what everyone talks about more often. So let's go to scenario 1. I'm just going to bring up the generic training calendar for the month. We've just played Chelsea last Saturday and we've got Watford on the Thursday. So this schedule for these 2 weeks isn't too bad. However, before that, we had Leicester, West Brom and Villa in the space of a week. Now, if this was one of my long-term stories where I'm fully engaged and not having a chat with people at the same time, this is where I take my action for rest. But the first thing I want to do is focus on weaknesses. Now, one of the things that happens quite often early in a season, particularly in the lower leagues, you'll bring in 10, 15, 20 players because in non-league, the whole squad virtually turns over every year. At that point, you know, it's on the dynamic screen, which we all know is basically the most important in getting results in this year's game. You'll see a poor team cohesion. Now, ours has always been pretty good in most of our saves after that first 6 months, because we work on it, and we work on it hard. So the first few weeks of the season, when we've only got one game a week, any weeks where we've only got a cup game rather than 3 league games in a week, what I'll generally do in those early days is, let's say it's the Monday, for example, and we've got the whole week off, I'll go and change one of the sessions, whether it's defending, whether it's ground defence, defending engaged, one of those sort of things, and I will change it to team cohesion. Now that can be an extracurricular thing in terms of team bonding, which that gets your team cohesion increased, that increases your happiness. If you're having a poor run as well, can be useful there, reduces fatigue coincidentally, but you could also work on the sort of tactical side or the general tactical side, which is slightly increasing your cohesion, not so much, but isn't taking too much away from the attributes, which the other one does. It's a complete focus on team bonding. The difference here is if you've got a lot of players who are coming in and playing in roles they're not natural in. Now, we've always seen this year, of course, you've got a left back, but are they a natural wing back, a full back, complete wing back? How do they slot into your tactic? If you've got a lot of players where they haven't got tactical familiarity because you're playing them in a different role to their preference, then this one's probably better, because if tactical familiarity, the player's getting used to their role as well, and they're still bonding with the team. But do be aware that the cohesion as an overall group will take a little bit longer there. The easiest way to judge that, let me cancel this one for now, is just to go to your tactics, pick your first 11, and see how many of them, if we put up the full view, have got tactical familiarity here, because you can see for ours, generally it's pretty good. The fullbacks are alright, it's only a couple of the midfielders where we keep juggling the roles. If, say, the 2 centre-halves were struggling, if we had the holding midfielder struggling as well, then we'd probably think more about using the tactical familiarity rather than the team bonding. But that's just a choice based on the players you've got, how much of a turnover you've had, and which is more of a priority to you. The player's individual tactical familiarity or the team cohesion as a whole. If you've got decent enough familiarity here, I'd recommend team bonding. So it's only one session a week for me, but I just try and make sure that we're increasing it a little bit quicker than we would normally. And of course, the boys are playing together as well, so it's going to happen over time. However, later in the season, or on seasons where we haven't had much turnover, so say the last one with Derby, what we'll tend to do is, instead of doing the team cohesion, which will already be good, we'll focus on areas where we can get quick gains. So one of my favourites is set pieces. It's an obvious one. If you can get some set piece routines, if you can get a big team of mainly players over 6 foot, something we had at one of our clubs early in the head coaching non-league this year, you can score headers galore. You can score from set pieces galore just by doing an extra session. Especially if you're a part-time team in non-league. You're together for, say, 3 training sessions a week over 2 nights, and you spend a third of that time on set pieces. There aren't going to be many other sides in a league that do that. Now, you do have to bear in mind, that's going to leave you then a bit more susceptible from open play. You might lose a little bit of your physicality, because playing from corners isn't going to help your stamina a great deal. But what you have to bear in mind is where are your quickest gains. And from non-league for me, or as a new side coming up to a division like Derby this year, that's set pieces. Let's try and nick 4 or 5 cheap goals. Whereas when we get to Premier League level, we're probably looking at, has it been a World Cup year? Do we need to boost the lads physically? Or do we actually need to give them a bit of a rest and try and work on the technical side a bit more, get them up to scratch? So it's an interesting balance depending on what stage of the season you're at, what stage in the football pyramid you're at, and how your team's performing on the pitch. Of course, if you keep getting done by crosses out wide, then you want to work on defending wide areas. If you're getting done from crosses into the box by headers, you want to work on aerial defence. You want to work on an engaged defending if you're pressing. Disengaged if you want to sit off the ball. All of those little things, you can spot your weaknesses and patterns in the data hub without going into too much detail. I showed that a couple of months ago in the guide you can find in the eye above, and it's very simple to see that just by looking at the generic screen for the data hub without going into all of the detailed stats. So if you can get an overall idea there for anything that you can't see with your own eyes during the highlights, then it can give you a head start on that front. However, later in the season, or if you go on a cup run in the lower leagues, You're more worried about fatigue than you are, say, team cohesion, than you are, say, set pieces, because the only thing that's costing you games is you've got essentially 15 good players at non-league level, and you've got a game every 3 days, which means once a week you're having to give them all a rest. Well, let's try and avoid that. So what we like to do, and I'll take this week of Leicester, West Brom and Villa for an example. Now, this is the Twitch stream. I don't get involved in the training. If this was my one club story or this was the head coach, what I would do after this Leicester game, I'd have a look at the Sunday, which is normally recovery and rest. That's what they do most of the time. However, what I try and do is move both of those to rest, and then on the Monday, move the morning session to a recovery before getting into normal things. Now again, as we mentioned with the team bonding and the set pieces and whatever else at the start of the season, this is going to harm other parts of your game plan. But sometimes the coaches will put in physical training when you've got games every 3 days. That isn't beneficial. Defending and attacking training, if they don't know your pattern of play by March, then I think you're going to be stuffed anyway. It is so crucial for me that you have a set tactic or a set 2 tactics that you've trained and don't deviate from them, because that ruins this. If you're changing shape willy-nilly and playing things that players have never seen before, you're going to have to get as much tactical and technical training in as possible. But for me, I try to get solid tactical 2 built in, trained regularly, and then by March we can look and say, actually, do we really need a defending and attacking and a possession session when we've only got a day and a half to train between games? No. Let's rest the players all of Sunday, let's do a recovery on Monday morning, and then let's just have the 2 sessions. Keep your match preview, because that's the tactical side, and then just do a couple of lighter sessions, or a couple of things where you feel your biggest weaknesses are. Or even your biggest strength, if you're a great side in the league and can outperform teams. What you shouldn't really be doing, though, is having an intensive day like that, because that's not going to help the fatigue of your team. It's going to slow down their recovery. And that's the last thing we want when we want as many of our first team available as possible every single game. And while at Premier League level, yes, you're always going to have 20 decent players. When you're in the National League North and South, when you're in Wales, when you're in Northern Ireland second tier, whatever it might be, having even 8 of your first 11 fit rather than 6 can be the difference between winning a title and being second. So I really do believe in that quite strongly. Similarly, if you're dominant in an area, particularly at lower levels, just train it loads. Because if you're outscoring teams and you're doing it by getting crosses in from wide areas, then focus on attacking wide play. Focus on direct attacking play. Focus on playing the ball wide and direct. Because if you can outscore teams at that level, you can focus on your strengths. As long as you're doing a little bit on the other side, when you're part-time training, you've got to make the most of being good at what you're good at and making sure you get as many points as possible easily. And yes, you could train and do the defensive work to nick you the odd point that you might lose somewhere, the odd win instead of a draw. But if that sacrifices 10 other points because you've now forgotten how to do the attacking bits with pretty average players, it can very quickly dry up, particularly in front of goal. So I would always recommend focus on your strengths, but at the start of the season, when you're a professional team, just use that 1 session a week. And then towards the end of it, use it for rest and recovery. But generally speaking, I do leave the coaches to decide what to do here. I think the general coaching and the team training, they're a little bit better at deciding themselves than the individual stuff where you see some weird and wacky things come up. For some reason, they always have about 7 players training on set pieces, and you're not going to have 7 players that need to be great at taking them. So that's why in the next episode, we're going to look at individual training. Lovely segue, I know. So if you're looking forward to that one, which will be live at the same time in a day or 2, please do put a thumbs up on the video and subscribe down below for regular content. We've got daily FM22 videos from 2 long-term stories. You can find both of those playlists up in the eye above. Please do check out the Twitch channel and the football podcast too. But just above my head now, you should be able to find a Data Hub special, which we did a couple of months ago. So please do check that out, and I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.